seem to have lost 4 years of work over lunch. I completed my PhD 2011 and began work as a physiologist, backfilling a maternity leave position at the AIS, and I was fortunate enough to work with the National Women's Water Polo team. So we're going to change tack a bit from Ryan's presentation, which was very mechanistic, and we're going to go back to being very applied. And if you've got any questions about the design of what we've done, you could probably ask the water polo coach, but be prepared because he's quite scary. So I came from working with the National Women's Cycling team, and they're all about 50 kilos and about this high, to working with the Women's Water Polo team. And so I was, didn't know very much about water polo, and I'm not sure how much you guys know, so I'll give you a few facts. It's the oldest Olympic team sport currently, and there's 6 field players, 1 goalkeeper, and you can interchange as much as you want, but once play stops, so if a goal's scored or if there's a kick out or at different times. So it's 4 8-minute quarters. The clock stops every time goes out, so these can drag on to sort of 10, 11, 12 minutes. And as I said, unlimited rotations. So there hasn't been a whole heap of research in water polo. Frankie Tan and Ted Polglaze spent a lot of time just looking at the demands of women's water polo, going back through video footage of the World Championships and really seeing what the game was all about. And from that, it's really obvious it's a really high intensity, intermittent type of play. Lots of repeat sprints, not only of a swimming nature, but of jumping, wrestling, that type of activity. And if you ever get a chance to watch women's water polo in particular, you might see that, you might liken it to shark attack, drowning type at various points. So it's a very, very physical game. So having done a lot of work with water polo, with altitude with cycling, one of the things I wanted to see is how I could influence and help the team. And I thought, how could altitude training, in particular live high, train low, simulated live high, train low, how could that help the team? So we've got, obviously, one of the many mechanisms that may be associated with altitude training is an increase in hemoglobin mass and the benefits of that for aerobic metabolism. So that might influence the water polo play in two ways. By increasing aerobic power, they're able to operate at a higher work rate during the game, but also this enhanced aerobic metabolism might be beneficial for the resynthesis of phosphocreatine and help their repeat sprint ability. And in that regard, potentially making them more physically suited to playing water polo. So a few considerations to think of in the year was when to put it during the season, starting 18 months out from the Olympic Games. How long should we go? How high do we go? And are those considerations the same as working with endurance athletes? So this was our high road to London, as it were. So we started in October. Sorry, that should be 2011. The games were already gone by then. So I started October of the year before, and we were looking at using altitude training in the base phase there. So took a stab in the dark and decided to use the same protocol as we used with the cyclists and the runners. So 14 hours a day at 3,000 metres. And that was about 8 weeks out from the Canada Cup. Then there was another block in February, March. So this was almost like, although it was 2 different exposures, it was like 2 camps combined to 1 big camp. 11 days separating it in the middle. But this time, based on the results of the first, I decided that we'd go a little bit lower because the girls had been getting really tired in the first block and they were going to have to be playing a lot of games in this second training camp. So we decided to go to 2,500 for the first and 2,800 for the second bit. And this was 6 weeks out from a tour that included the London Test event and then the World League rounds and finals. And based on that and some lengthy discussions, we decided to target another, only 4 players this time. So all field players had used altitude in the previous ones. We just decided to target 4 key players to use altitude 6 weeks out from the games. Wouldn't be an altitude camp at the AIS if we didn't measure hemoglobin mass. So this was measured before the start and the end of each camp. And here I decided to do it 2 weeks post when I saw the girls again, just to see if we still had a residual effect. And as part of the fitness assessment of the players, they also did a shuttle test in the water at the start of each of these blocks. So have to point out here that we're not looking at the change in fitness performances because we're only measuring it at the start of each camp. The in-water beep test was developed by Clara Chichi, and it's basically similar to a beep test on land, but it's 10 metres and just the shuttles are obviously swum with water polo turns at each end. And from those 3 occasions, when we tested it, could pull the data, and we got a large correlation between hemoglobin mass and beep test score, which is similar to work that Walter has published. And this is some data of my own from cyclists, where there's a strong correlation between hemoglobin mass and VO2 max. So here are the hemoglobin mass results. So the first block, the purpose of that block, we were hoping, was to accelerate base phase adaptations and reduce the need for lots of swimming. So it's been said a couple of times that, you know, why don't we just train the athletes more and we could get the same benefits from training. Well, if you're thinking about the cost-benefit ratio here, there's no cost to our athletes. They're very fortunate to be able to use Altitude House, and plus we want to reduce the actual amount of time they spend swimming and training, because in water polo there's an awful lot of shoulder injuries, and if we can reduce the amount of load on our players, then that means more time in front of goal taking shots and less time on the physio bed getting treatment. So that was the purpose of that. And we did get a 3.7% increase in hemoglobin mass and 90% confidence limits here, and you can see the individual plots there. And we can also see that it was, 2 weeks, this was measured 2 weeks later, and the change is still evident in a lot of the players. We also identified a few iron deficient players, but I'll get to that in a little bit. Then block 2 and 3, based on the success of the first block, we decided to repeat it. And this time we got a 4.5% increase, and this is actually this is change from baseline. So this is not if we actually look at the change versus the very beginning from October, it's actually an 8.5%. And this is one of the first times that we've had it, you know, every single subject increase. So we're actually getting a lot better at preparing our athletes before they go into the house and making sure that that they can get a hemoglobin mass response. And then lastly, the 4 targeted players at the end. Unfortunately, we had a whooping cough outbreak within the team, and we actually had to remove the subjects from the house after 6 nights. So the differences there were trivial. like to say a little bit about the importance of iron supplementation, which I'm becoming a little bit of a Nazi about. So we always screen the athletes when they come in. If we can get a screening 2 weeks before, then that's ideal, but this time it was as soon as they arrived at the camp. And we supplement everyone unless their ferritin is particularly high. So you can see, although there's not enough data points here to make a correlation or anything really conclusive, but there are a few athletes who had quite low ferritins who didn't respond, and so we continued them on iron supplementation until block 2 and 3. They came back and their ferritins were much better, and we did get that good response there. So just to tell you a little bit about London, we won all 3 games in the rounds. And then in the knockout games, after a very nerve-wracking and long game, we beat China on penalty shootout. Unfortunately lost to USA in the semi-final after extra time, and then won the bronze medal again after extra time and a very nerve-wracking last few seconds of the game. But the key thing, there's a lot of extra time played here, so trying to get the athletes as fit as possible was a real goal of ours. So the lessons that we learnt from this, although it's a team sport, it was important to individualise as much as possible. Of course, in a practical setting, you've got to have a team sport athletes training together. But the beauty of using live high, train low is that you can not have everyone at the same altitude. Our altitude house has independent room settings, so we could have the players that were more sort of endurance beasts set a little bit higher, and also those that weren't coping could be lower, or they could be removed from the house. And so, as has been alluded to before, there may be some positional differences that you may want to consider. The blocks of altitude that we used were relatively short in duration, but we still got large increases in hemoglobin mass, and this may be related to the fact that there might be more room for improvement in these types of athletes, as opposed to an endurance athlete who's really adapting that system over time. But also, if we think about the non-hematological benefits of altitude, then they may also be have benefits for repeat sprint ability and buffering. Of course, match performance is nuanced by many factors, and not to mention skill, tactics, and in particular for us at the Games, refereeing decisions. So it was impossible for us to say that altitude contributed to the bronze medal, but I personally believe that we didn't hinder it in any way. And obviously future research should look at the relationship between the changes in hemoglobin mass that we saw and actually if that did induce a fitness gain. The coach, he was obviously really happy with the girls that they won a medal. Unfortunately, it wasn't gold that we wanted, but once you get into the bronze medal game, you have to salvage something, and they did. And he's already planning to use altitude again in the Rio cycle. I'll just leave you with this final quote from the goalkeeper. She said, our coach concentrated on aerobic power to push us past the length of the normal game. As it turned out, we had to play 3 extra time matches, and even though the US beat us in the second last one, it was not because they were fitter. So thank you all for listening, and for Andrew Moser, who has just started in the physio department at Aspetar, for encouraging me to get this data out here, because it is quite unique, a real-world team using simulated live high, train low.
Thank you, Laura. Any questions? We'll take one or two quick questions if anybody has any.
Hi, Laura. Thanks for the presentation. As I talked to you before, as you know, I will be working with some water polo players and a female team as well. So I was wondering about the way you're trying to get some advice here, some tips, for Rio. No, just trying to. It's good to see once again that the live high trainer exposures have led to an increase in the HB mass. But as you concluded, how much do you think that this has contributed to the bronze medal, let's say, or to medals? Because it's team sports once again, and you never know what's going to happen. So can you comment on that, or?
Yeah, of course, it's impossible to say. And if I was after a pay rise, I'd probably say that I contributed a lot. But yeah, obviously, they did have to play 3 games of extra time, and so fitness was important to them. But hemoglobin mass may not have done anything. But if someone offered me a little bit of extra hemoglobin, I would take it.
Because Australia has always been amongst the best, I guess, in female. So, and I know that the US doesn't, if I'm right, doesn't do any. The team doesn't do any altitude training, I think, and so they're also among the best.
Team, no.
Yeah. So that's why I was just wondering about if you could comment on that. Yeah.
You didn't measure pre-post yo-yo tests or big tests, but you did have a serial of pre-tests. Can you comment if they increased during the sort of multiple exposures of the altitude training?
The food test was always scheduled at the start of each camp, and was probably confounded a lot by National League games or international travel. So for some players there was an increase, and then others they probably didn't perform as well on that day. So yeah, it's quite hard to say.
Thank you very much. We'll end there in the interest of time.
Can we do one more real quick?
Yeah, quick. Okay.
I'll be quick. Laura, the data that I'm trying to get my head around is the magnitude of the increase in red cell mass you got with just 9 days. I guess, A, do you know of any other studies that have shown that big of a response in 9 days? And is there anything unique about these particular set of athletes that you think could explain why?
Yeah. Have you ever seen a female water polo player? Have you seen how much they eat?
I can imagine.
Yeah. So I think they were sponges. So they just totally absorbed the altitude. I'm loath to agree with everyone that there's this relationship between how your starting hemoglobin mass level and how much you increase, because we have seen some big increases in people with very high starting levels. But I think for these guys, the fact that their aerobic system is relatively underdeveloped, given the nature of the sport, I think that was one thing. And then the fact that they eat like whales probably supports the adaptation in that time. That's just my gut feeling. But
so maybe for comparison, we need to get couch potatoes who eat a lot and put them in and see if they have the same response. I mean,
I'm not saying that a water polo player is a couch potato. They're athletes, but yeah, that could be similar.
Thank you very much.